I remember the exact moment my world tilted. My mom's voice, sharp and deliberate, cut through the room like ice. "Love doesn't pay bills," she said. That's when she canceled my engagement. Just like that. No discussion, no hesitation, no concern for what I wanted. I sat there frozen, the engagement ring in my hand suddenly feeling like a weight I couldn't lift. The man I loved, my fiancé, stood silently, unsure whether to fight for me or shrink into the shadows. I didn't know then that silence could feel so suffocating, like I was trapped behind a glass wall that everyone could see through but no one could touch. It wasn't the first time she'd made choices for me, but this cut deeper than anything before. I tried to speak, but the words died in my throat. "Mom, why?" I whispered, more like a prayer than a question. Her eyes didn't waver. "You're young. You'll understand later. Practicality matters. Love is expensive, expensive." That word kept echoing in my mind long after she left the room. Expensive. As if the life I imagined for myself didn't matter. I walked out into the cold night. The city lights blurring with tears I refused to let fall. I replayed every conversation, every laugh, every promise I had believed in. How could she do this? How could someone who promised to protect me choose money over my happiness? I felt humiliation creeping in, not from my fiancé, not even from my mom, but from the crushing realization that no one was asking what I wanted. 3 months later, my life had changed in ways I couldn't have predicted. I was sitting in a small, quiet cafe, staring at a stranger across the table. My heart raced, but not in fear, something else entirely. He smiled at me, that kind of smile that made you feel like the world had slowed down just to let you breathe. And then it hit me, he wasn't just a stranger. He was my husband. I could hear the disbelief in my own voice as I said, This is happening?" He nodded, calm, steady, patient. "It is, and it's exactly what we need." My mind spiraled, trying to understand how someone I barely knew could step into a life torn apart by betrayal and somehow make it feel whole again. That's when the first seed of quiet satisfaction took root. My mom had never asked me what I wanted, but now, finally, I had a choice she couldn't control. But let me back up a little, because what happened between that day and now isn't simple. I had to wait, I had to plan, and I had to watch silently while everyone assumed they still held the power. My mom, in particular, believed she had the final word. She didn't know that I had started counting the days, marking every slight, every dismissive look, every comment that reminded me I was powerless. She didn't know that the clock had started ticking the first few weeks after the engagement was broken. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply moved through life in a haze, letting people underestimate me. My ex-fiancé reached out once, awkwardly, unsure whether to offer comfort or apologies. I told him nothing, not a word. I watched him leave me behind, and somewhere deep down, a part of me was learning patience. My mom, meanwhile, flourished in her belief that she had made the right decision. She hosted parties, flaunted her choices, and smiled as if she had never caused a ripple of pain. But beneath the surface, there were cracks she didn't see. A friend of hers mentioned a problem with the financial arrangements she had made for my cancelled engagement. Nothing serious yet, but enough to hint that her world wasn't as perfect as she pretended. And that's when I realized revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's quiet, almost invisible. I started small. Emails, texts, small reminders sent with a casual tone that hinted at knowledge without revealing it. I discovered things she had overlooked, files she hadn't secured, appointments she had scheduled without double-checking. Every time I discovered a small gap, a hidden weakness, my confidence grew. I didn't act impulsively. I waited, calculated. Patience, I learned, was the first weapon of revenge. And yet, despite all this planning, despite the satisfaction growing in secret, there were nights I cried alone. Not because I regretted the plan, but because I wished it hadn't come to this. That quiet pain, that humiliation she had inflicted, was a shadow I couldn't shake. But it was also a reminder that I was no longer powerless. That eventually, every wrong could be addressed, if not with shouting, then with quiet, undeniable strategy. Then, the unexpected happened. The man I would marry, the stranger who was about to become my husband, entered my life. At first, it was accidental. A shared project, a mutual friend, a conversation about books we both loved. He was nothing like I expected, and yet everything I needed. Calm, intelligent, aware of the world in ways I hadn't been. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he became the partner I could rely on to see the plan through. By the time we sat across from each other in that cafe, months later, I realized that life had shifted completely. My mom's words, "love doesn't pay bills," still lingered, but their sting had softened. I had found a way to honor myself, and in that moment, I understood that power didn't always scream. Sometimes it smiled quietly from across a table. After that cafe meeting, life began to feel like a game. I had finally learned the rules too. My mom thought she had ended my happiness, but she had no idea she had handed me the first piece of power. Every interaction with her now became a careful dance. I smiled, I nodded. I played the role of the compliant daughter she assumed I still was. Meanwhile, I was watching, learning, and waiting. It wasn't easy. She had an uncanny ability to spot weakness in people and exploit it. She would casually mention money, stability, or family obligations in a way that made anyone hesitate. But now, I hesitated on purpose, not out of fear, but as a strategy. I let her believe she still had control. She never suspected that behind my polite nods, I was planning every next move. Every meeting, every call, every word she spoke became a puzzle piece I quietly stored. Then came the first real test. My mom invited me over under the guise of reconciliation. "We should talk," she said. I agreed, knowing fully well that the talk would be about control, not understanding. As I entered her home, the air smelled the same fresh flowers in the vase, faint perfume lingering on furniture, and that subtle tension that made my skin crawl. She started carefully, almost too carefully, talking about how practical life decisions matter, about how I would understand someday. I nodded. I listened. Every once in a while, I asked a question, small and polite, to appear engaged. And all the while, I noticed details she overlooked: a misplaced check, a forgotten appointment in her calendar, a subtle tension between her and her financial advisors. She was meticulous, but not infallible. That night, I realized something crucial. Revenge doesn't need to be dramatic to be devastating. Sometimes it's quiet, invisible, and sometimes it requires a partner who sees the unseen. That's when my fiancé, the stranger turned husband, stepped in, not with loud declarations, but with calm observations that confirmed the cracks I had noticed. Together, we mapped them mentally, noting which weaknesses could be leveraged without ever crossing a line. Around the 8th week after the engagement fiasco, I received a call from my mom's assistant. She was frantic, voice trembling. "I think there's been a mix-up with the accounts. It's not huge," but I didn't interrupt. I stayed silent, just listening. And for the first time, I felt that quiet, dangerous thrill. The knowledge that I had set the stage, and the first dominoes were wobbling. It was the kind of moment that makes you want to rewind. The realization that all her careful planning, all her attempts to control the narrative, were suddenly vulnerable to a methodical, invisible strategy. I didn't celebrate. I stayed calm. I let her panic do the work for me. And that's when I understood one key truth. Revenge is strongest when the other person doesn't even know it's coming. Meanwhile, life outside this silent chessboard was moving on. My relationship with my new husband developed layers I hadn't anticipated. There were nights when we talked for hours about everything except the plan. He would share stories from his past, his failures, his moments of doubt, and in those quiet confessions, I felt a trust growing that I hadn't realized I needed. He wasn't just a player in this revenge. He became a mirror, reflecting the patience and intelligence I sometimes forgot I possessed. But the biggest challenge wasn't him or the planning, it was myself. There were nights I doubted whether I could continue the charade. Nights I questioned whether the humiliation, the pain, and the waiting were worth it. Each time, I reminded myself of that cafe moment, that calm satisfaction of finally having a choice, a life outside my mom's control. That image became my anchor, pulling me through moments when everything felt impossible. Then came the replay-worthy moment, the first time I tested the subtle leverage I had built. I sent an email to one of her key financial contacts, carefully phrased to appear like an innocent query about routine procedures. Within 24 hours, there was chaos she hadn't anticipated. Small delays, miscommunications, the faint unease creeping into her carefully curated life. She called me, voice clipped, frustrated. "Did you do something with the Smith account?" she asked. I smiled, calm. "I just asked a question, Mom." And there it was, the first visible tremor of control slipping from her hands.
In the meantime, I maintained a calm exterior. I laughed at work, shared ordinary stories with friends, and built my life forward. But the quiet ledger in my phone, the collection of every slight and dismissive message, grew heavier in my mind. Each note, each record was a step closer to the moment I would assert myself. It was around this time that a subtle twist occurred. My mother called one night, casual as ever. She spoke about her day, her garden, my sister's work. No apology, no acknowledgement, just small talk. I listened quietly, only replying with polite, measured words. I did not give her the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. The calm on my side, contrasted with her oblivious cheerfulness, was deliberate. I realized then that this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not a confrontation, not a lecture, just observation, waiting for her to underestimate the weight of my patience, and in that moment, I knew the next step, the one decisive action that would speak louder than years of explanations or apologies, was approaching. I had one chance to deliver it, one sentence, one moment to assert that the silence had power, and I would not waste it. The morning of the family reunion, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in front of me. The invitation stared back at me, glowing like a challenge. I could almost feel my mother expecting a quick reply. She expected me to type a polite yes, to forgive silently, to maintain the facade, but I didn't. I waited. I watched. Every passing minute added weight to the anticipation. Every hour amplified the eventual impact of my decision. I thought about the aisle, about the empty seats, about the calm message that had first broken me and had now, months later, become my shield. My husband noticed my silence. "You're going to reply, aren't you?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "Not yet," I said. "It's not about being mean. It's about being seen." Hours passed. Calls started coming in. My father, nervously polite. My sister, attempting humor. My mother, cheerful, completely unaware of the storm brewing on my end. I read their messages, noticed the shifts in tone as impatience crept in, and stored them mentally. Every word, every slight, every expectation would matter. Finally, I typed a single sentence. One line that would carry the weight of months. I paused, reread it, calm, controlled, precise. Then I sent it. I already celebrated alone. "Enjoy your later." I didn't call. I didn't explain. I didn't add anything. The sentence was enough. The reactions were instantaneous. My phone buzzed with missed calls, texts, and voice messages. My mother's voice trembled on the first voicemail. "Emily, I didn't realize." And then she stopped, uncertain. My father tried to reason, his tone defensive yet shocked. My sister sent a flurry of messages, angry, confused, and desperate. I stayed calm. I let them feel it. Let them realize, quietly, that their assumptions had been wrong. That I had not reacted earlier, that I had not forgiven automatically. That their later could never erase the choice they had made months ago. The family group chat exploded. Messages poured in, questions, guilt, explanations, excuses. Some tried to justify. Others tried to manipulate. But I did not reply. I let the storm unfold, watched it rise, and smiled quietly. My silence had become louder than any argument. Over the next few days, the subtle shifts began. My mother started calling more frequently, her tone softer, hesitant. She tried small gestures, sending flowers, asking casual questions, making invitations that I didn't immediately accept. Each action was a reminder of her underestimation. Each apology unsaid but implied in her attempts to reconnect. Friends noticed the change too. My husband mentioned that people were commenting on how I seemed stronger, calmer, more confident. They didn't know the ledger I had kept. The screenshots, the ignored calls, the months of quiet observation. They only saw the result, control, and the result was satisfying. Not because I had hurt them, but because they finally understood, quietly, that their decisions carried consequences. My mother realized that ignoring my feelings, skipping my wedding, assuming later would suffice, was a mistake. And she felt it without me needing to shout or demand acknowledgement. There was one particular moment that replayed in my mind. My mother, standing at a family dinner, realizing that I wouldn't be present the next day for a minor event. Her smile faltered. She whispered to my father, almost audibly, "She's serious. She isn't just upset anymore." That quiet shock, calm but real, was worth every moment of waiting. I had built this carefully, deliberately. Every ignored message, every patient observation, every small note of injustice had contributed to this moment. And it wasn't done yet. Revenge, in its quiet form, has layers. Not all are revealed at once. Not all are meant to be noticed immediately. Weeks later, another family event came up. Invitations were sent. My mother's note next to my name was almost apologetic. The weight of her oversight hung in the air, unspoken, visible in the hesitation of her voice when she called. I didn't rush. I didn't reply immediately. I let the anticipation grow, and when I finally did attend, it was on my terms. Not as a submissive daughter. Not as someone who would excuse absence. I was calm, controlled, fully aware of the quiet power shift. Every glance, every word, every small interaction was now in my favor. I had learned a lesson in patience, in strategy, in observing human behavior. And I knew something essential. Revenge isn't about destruction or anger. It's about asserting one's value silently, precisely, and with dignity. The satisfaction wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. They finally understood that actions have consequences. That later, when used carelessly, carries weight. And that sometimes, the most effective revenge is a single, calm sentence delivered at the perfect moment. The day I finally attended the family gathering, I walked in calmly. No rush, no dramatics, just measured steps. Every detail of my plan played in my mind like a quiet symphony. The invitation had been their attempt to fix months of neglect, but now the power was mine. My mother noticed me immediately. Her smile faltered slightly, that tiny hesitation I had been waiting for. I greeted everyone politely, laughed when necessary, and let subtle tension linger. Unspoken but felt. Every glance, every small remark reflected the underestimation she had carried for months. And then came the moment. My mother offered a gift and began softly. "We didn't mean to." I stopped her with a calm, precise line I already celebrated alone. "Enjoy your later." The room paused. Silence fell heavier than any argument. My mother's eyes widened. My father tensed. My sister's humor froze. That single sentence, calm and measured, carried months of quiet observation and patience. They realized instantly that their assumptions had been wrong. Later could no longer dismiss me. Over the next hours, small gestures unfolded. My mother tried to engage, apologetic but hesitant. My father attempted explanations, unsure. My sister softened, realizing the gravity of what they had ignored. I responded politely but firmly, asserting presence and control without shouting or confrontation. Friends and distant relatives noticed. "Emily seems stronger," my husband whispered. They didn't know about the ledger of ignored messages, missed calls, and voicemails I had kept. They only saw the result: calm, measured, undeniable power. Weeks later, subtle shifts continued. Invitations began respecting my preferences. My mother cautiously sought my opinion on family matters. She was learning slowly that her previous indifference had consequences. The ultimate satisfaction was quiet. No celebration, no spectacle. Just a calm demonstration that choices, even delayed ones, matter. Later had become a mirror, reflecting their actions back at them. Reflecting on the months leading to this moment, I realized revenge wasn't about anger or confrontation. It was about asserting value, being seen, and letting others recognize their mistakes naturally. That evening, I asked my husband softly, "If you were in my place, would you have done the same?" Not for an answer, but to reflect on patience, control, and subtle strength. They had underestimated me for months. And now, quietly, with dignity and calm, I had shown them the cost of their choices. The quiet victory was mine. Think carefully. If you were in my place, what would you do? Share your thoughts below and stay tuned for more stories like this. Subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon.
Finally, I introduced a neutral firm to manage the trust permanently. My brother's access to the house was formally limited, legally enforced. The house was safe. The finances were controlled. And I remained the calm center, the one in control. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just quiet, deliberate power. Every interaction, every delay, every carefully measured word reminded them of the shift. I didn't need to declare victory. They could feel it. Every glance, every pause, every hesitation from them confirmed it. And then, a subtle message arrived from my mom. "Laura, I see now. I see everything." I didn't reply immediately. I let her sit with it, let her understand fully. Later never came, but this patient, precise, undeniable control had, the layers were complete. The slow burn of patience, the calculated manipulation, the restrained guidance, it all culminated here. I had orchestrated justice quietly, legally, and without malice, but with undeniable impact. That night, I sat back, reflecting. No celebration, no loud revenge, no anger, just control, just power that came from patience, from observation, from understanding that sometimes the quietest moves leave the deepest marks, and they knew it now. Weeks turned into months. The house was secure. The finances were under careful management. My brother no longer called in panic. He didn't need to. I had taught the lessons quietly, without shouting, without confrontation. And still, every interaction reminded them that the power dynamic had shifted completely. My mom called one morning, hesitating at first, then slowly, carefully. "Laura, I never realized how much we relied on you without seeing it." I smiled softly, calm, restrained. Sometimes the people we love take us for granted. Actions have consequences. She didn't argue. She didn't excuse herself. She was quiet, reflecting, understanding. That silence was louder than any apology could have been. My brother stopped trying to charm, to manipulate, to negotiate. Every desperate attempt had been neutralized. He understood he had been outmaneuvered, but without drama, without rage. He had learned. I visited the house one evening. It felt familiar, yet different. My presence was no longer invisible. The halls, the rooms, the spaces where I had felt overlooked, now carried a quiet acknowledgement of my influence. No celebration, no banners, no congratulations, just a subtle recognition of power that came from patience, planning, and restraint. I sat in my old room, folding the graduation gown I had kept all these years. I remembered the steps outside the hall, the photo of my mom with my brother, the empty silence that had followed, the sting of betrayal, the humiliation, the loneliness. They were still there, but tempered now by control, by quiet justice. I thought of all the small steps I had taken, asking questions, reviewing every document, managing delays, controlling access. Each move had been deliberate, measured. Each micro twist, each pause, each carefully crafted delay had brought them to this moment. The realization of their mistakes. The undeniable understanding that I was no longer a passive observer of my own life. They had called me before, begging. Now, they called me only when necessary, cautious, respectful, aware. The reversal was complete. I had given them the consequences of their choices without cruelty, without malice, but with clarity and precision. And the lessons would stay with them quietly forever. That evening, I sent a final email summarizing the changes, the trust, the oversight, and the protections. I didn't explain my motives. I didn't justify my actions. I simply laid out the facts, calm and professional. A mirror reflecting everything they had failed to see years ago. After hitting send, I leaned back. Silence. The weight of years lifted. Satisfaction didn't roar, it whispered. Quiet victory, patient and deliberate, had replaced anger. The power once denied to me was now undeniable. Later never came. But what did come was clarity, recognition, understanding. The subtle shift that made them see me fully for the first time, not just as a daughter, not just as a sibling, but as someone who had quietly mastered her own life. I thought about the people watching this story unfold. The ones who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Patience, observation, control, actions, not words, carry the weight of consequences. That was my truth. And finally, I spoke softly to myself, reflecting on everything that had happened. If you were in my place, would you have done the same? No shouting, no celebration, no false victory, just quiet, undeniable power. And that was enough. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm I had quietly orchestrated. The house remained safe, the finances stable, and my family, my mother and brother, had learned to navigate the consequences of their past choices. There was no dramatic confrontation, no loud celebrations, no sudden apologies, just a quiet understanding that things were different now, that I was different. I walked through the rooms of the house one evening, memories washing over me. The laughter of my brother as a child, the birthday parties, the small disappointments, the moments I had been overlooked, they were all still there. But now, I held the weight of those memories without being crushed by them. I had transformed my pain into patience, my humiliation into control, my silence into strategy. My mother called that night. Her voice was softer, more reflective than I had ever heard it. "Laura, I don't know if I can ever make up for everything." I smiled quietly. "You don't need to," I said. "Some lessons are learned best when they are experienced, not explained." She paused, understanding finally settling in. "I see now how much you had to endure." I didn't reply immediately. Silence was its own message. The acknowledgement in her pause, the weight of years realized in a single breath, carried more power than any words I could have spoken. I thought of my brother too, and the way his confidence had finally tempered into caution. He no longer assumed I would save him, no longer took my patience for granted. He had learned quietly, deliberately, through the framework I had set, and the lesson would stay with him far longer than any argument or shouting match ever could. Sitting alone in my room that night, I reflected on everything I had done. The careful planning, the patience, the small but deliberate manipulations. They were not acts of cruelty. They were acts of self-respect, justice, and understanding the power of observation. I hadn't needed to yell, to storm, to prove a point through confrontation. The quiet, patient control had spoken louder than anger ever could, and I realized something deeper. Life doesn't always give closure in loud, dramatic ways. Sometimes it gives you the quiet acknowledgement, the subtle shifts, the undeniable understanding of who truly holds the power. That had been my gift to myself, and in a way, to them as well. I thought about anyone watching, anyone who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed in their own life. There is strength in patience. There is power in observation. There is clarity in restraint. And sometimes, the most satisfying victories are the ones that unfold silently, without fanfare, letting the consequences speak for themselves. I leaned back, letting the calm settle. Later never came. But now, in this quiet, steady moment, the acknowledgement of what was owed, the balance restored, and the lessons learned, it was more than enough. And softly, almost to myself, I spoke the words I had carried all these years. "If you were in my place, would you have done the same?" The question hung in the air, not as a challenge, but as a reflection. And for the first time in years, I felt fully seen, fully in control, and fully at peace.